All right. New titles. Hello, Datatators. J. Oliver Glasgow here saying, whatever happened to blank private eye? Who is that? Well, stay tuned and make sure to hit subscribe and that bell thing for a reminder. Like, follow, and share. And welcome to another thrilling episode of Private Eye, the show that explores all things privacy without kicking you off of our cloud. Hey, you, get off of my cloud. Which brings me to my first topic. You know, you had some dreams once, didn't you? But they were just clouds in your coffee. Clouds in your coffee. It's good to gain perspective when you have cloud issues. Then you can say that you've looked at clouds from both sides now. You may even be grateful and say, send in the clouds. Yeah, what's that? One more pun and we'll have to pay royalties. All right, fellas, blow. You know, a lot's been happening in the cloud computing these days, and not all of it is good. For a deeper dive tonight, we have a very special set of guests from Parler.com, Amy Peikoff. She's their CPO, and we'll ask her if it's Parler or Parlay. And we'll also speak to Alan Nekhom, the CTO of Privacy.co-op, about a much-needed paper that was just published on what your business can do now that getting kicked off a cloud is a thing. Yep, that happened. So first, let's check in with Blank Private Eye and have him set the stage for our topic tonight, getting booted from the cloud. I've been searching for the Maltese cookie for 3 years. All clues finally led back to this place in the middle of nowhere. A small data cafe, a hard drive away from Twittersville. My name's Blank, Private Eye. And that's when she walked in. Her name, Parlay. But folks in these parts just called her Parler. I guess they're as confused about French phonics as I am. I mean, who else in the world spells a suffix with 17 consonants and pronounces it She didn't care how I said her name as long as I said it. What you need, Parl? She didn't mince words. I need a place to flop, you know, lay low and gather my thoughts. It wasn't her thoughts that was the problem. She had a lot of friends that had a lot of thoughts, but one of them thought thoughts they weren't supposed to think, a bit too wrong for the muscle in town. They kicked me out, she said, sniffing into her borrowed handkerchief. Sometimes reuse can go a bit too far. She hitched and said, gave me the reboot. Now everyone's turning me out, and 2.4 million of my friends are now homeless. That's a lot of friends. I was about to suggest an epic place for her to go when he walked in. I knew Oz for years. One day, not so long ago, he was just a pipsqueak bookseller, a real bookie making sales, and the next thing you know, he was a giant, a real Amazon. He growled, "Don't talk to Parler." I guess he ain't so parlez-vous with the Francais either. I can't make it any clearer than that, Blank, he sneered, all muscle, no brains. Look, Oz, I have a query for you. He knew my angle, said deleting people ain't a crime, only listening to their conversations and selling access to the insights is, and you'll have a hard time proving that, Alexa.
I only listen after you say the wake word.
I looked at him in the eye and asked, "What'd you call me?" "I meant Blank," he scoffed. "You're a real null, you know that?" I was about to tell him there's a difference between a blank and a null, but decided to be direct. "What's your game, Oz?" "The game is, I don't care what her friends think. I care about what my friends think. Gotta keep up my image at the thug cocktail parties with the 3 comma set." And that's when I saw my next move. I asked, "Look, sweetheart, what do you want?" She straightened her back in that way only a socialite can and said, "To give people a voice." I leveled with her. "Well, look, you shouldn't have messed with this oaf from the start. All his services are built to make it real easy to rely only on him. And that's when he's got you. It's going to take you weeks to get untangled from him. You got any scratch?" She cut a smile at me, only as sharp as her eyes, and said, "You know it, blank." Then here's a card for a place that doesn't ask questions and doesn't attend this brute's 3 comma club mixers. She said, "Your aces, blank," and planted a kiss on my cheek. She ran out of the building. Yeah, Parler's taking her neighborhood back for the good guys. Ha ha. Turning back around, I said to Oz, "This ain't over." He started to laugh in that way that runs chills. And with a cold glint of knowing in his eye, he said, "Maybe next time, blank," and he disappeared out the back door. There's always a back door. Just remember the lesson of Parler and a network where they buy and sell your secrets with cryptocurrency. It's good to have a friend who values your rights. I'm blank. Private Eye.
All right. And, wow, just perfect tonight. To have joining with us right now, I'm just going to bring her in right now into the studio with us, Amy Peikoff, who is joining us from Parler.com. Awesome to have you. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, Jay. How are you?
I am super, super. How about yourself?
I'm doing okay here. We are back online again. Actually, we've rebooted twice since Amazon took us down in January. The first took several weeks, and then we have built up an entirely new code base recently. And so we ended up having another reboot a couple weeks ago, and we're in the business right now, every day, just shoring up this new code base, and it's going to be scalable in a way that the prior code base was not. We're looking forward to, after a very rough beginning of this year, a pretty bright future at Parler, which I'm glad to talk about as well here today. Yeah,
that sounds very optimistic and great. Typically when we start our interviews off, just to kind of get the audience to know you a little bit, there's the French philosopher Bernard Pivot, and he had famous 10 questions that he would ask everybody. And, we're a nonprofit, so we can't afford to do all 10. So we can only afford to do 4.5 of them. Right. So I'm going to ask 4.5 questions. The half question, don't let it trip you up. Just do the best you can with it. But Star Trek or Star Wars?
Star Wars.
Good answer. What is your favorite number?
8.
That's a great number. I like it. What profession other than yours would you like to attempt?
Coding.
Coding. All right.
I've been wishing I could code lately. At Parler, I wish I could be more help on that side of things. Yes.
That's exciting. No, it's a good answer. It's a good answer. What is your favorite flavor?
Chocolate.
Great answer. Great answer. Now, this is a half a question. We run out of budget halfway through. So who would you like to, and that's where the question ends. So who would you like to?
How about coffee with Ayn Rand? Can we do that? I never did meet her, and that would be fun.
That is awesome. Amy Peikoff, UCLA and USC. So maybe you're a little conflicted when football season comes around. I don't know how you manage that. UCLA School of Law, USC PhD, talk show host for 2 different shows, founder and president of the Center for Legalization of Privacy.
Oh, so you dig that up too. Okay.
Love it. I know. I love it. It was awesome, of course. And now Chief Policy Officer for Parler. So, wow, resume reads like a black belt in charge of privacy and law.
Well, or it's this meandering thing where I actually found where I was supposed to be finally, right? So I see it that way. But yeah, the Center for Legalization of Privacy was really the thing, because the reason that was founded was to get involved in United States versus Facebook. And in that case, there's this consent decree between the FTC and Facebook, under which I argue that the FTC and the DOJ arguably have warrantless access to Facebook user data. So that's what I was doing immediately before joining Parler. That's how I came to the attention of a strategic investor in Parler.
Yeah, there's some good people and some questionable people in that whole e-discovery world. There's some legitimate companies, and then there's some companies you scratch your head and go, wow. And I think folks would be shocked at how much information is pulled by paying for it off of through these APIs from various platforms. They would be totally shocked. Our first question to you tonight, though, is it Parlay or Parler?
So there has been a little bit of a revival because, as you may have read in the media, our founding investor, Rebecca Mercer, is getting more involved again after, unfortunately, they had to let the former CEO, John Mates, go. And it was Rebecca Mercer, actually, who named the platform, actually her son, Parlay. It was Parlay originally. And then, as you were saying in your little film in the intro there, a lot of people around here just pronounce it Parler, and perhaps if we want to even reboot the pronunciation, we might be asking too much of Americans to say it Parlay. So I would give people a choice at this point.
There you go. Yeah, whatever works. I think in the South we say if it's grits that fit, swing with it. So yeah. Jordan Peterson is a college professor from Canada. He's much in the news and he's somewhat controversial, but he had an interesting quote recently I wanted to throw at you. He said that he hates to argue any position from the middle, because you ultimately become the bane of existence for the extremes on both sides, and they both see you as the extreme opposite, right? Is Parlay falling into that trap of of being thought of as one extreme or the other instead of just middle?
So the interesting thing is that we are neutral. So we are viewpoint neutral. And being viewpoint neutral these days and encouraging people just to think for themselves as opposed to obey an authority, whether it's the platform itself or, as we've seen with the recent news with Facebook, Facebook is choosing some other level of oversight or another authority to appeal to. At Parler, we believe that with respect to any content that is legal, the individual user should be the one to decide whether it's going to end up in his or her feed, and that you should think about this stuff critically, that other people should not be doing your thinking for you. And so we're radical in that sense. And I would say that some people on either side of the so-called aisle, the left or the right, might not be completely happy with our position, because there are some people on the right even who think that there should be, say, a right-wing platform. But really, we are viewpoint neutral. And given the dominance of the left wing in social media today, that ends up putting us really more opposed to them. But yeah, I would say also, perhaps with the focus on user privacy as well. If you are very extreme for user privacy, for instance, I am opposed to the so-called third-party doctrine that allows the government warrantless access to data. But there are many people on the right who would disagree with me about that personally. So I don't know that it's center so much, but it's just taking a series of positions that are very principled, and then you'll end up, finding disagreement all over the place.
Well, that's true. I can't think. By the way, one of our founders has said that we get too binary in our viewpoints on everything in the United States. That you don't have to look through a prism of your political views upon everything that you gaze. Sometimes you just need to back up and kind of take a breath and say, how do I feel about this topic in general? And it's interesting you should bring up having a right or right wing platform somewhere. Maybe that's needed or warranted, but recently I talked to a gentleman online and he was saying that folks that showed up at Parler just showed up at the wrong party and they should go to any other competitor. And I was like, well, the whole story here is that this was a growing competitor that was crushed
Right.
thrown out of AWS. So I think it's disingenuous for people to say just go to a competitor. So I feel kind of sorry for anybody that starts up right now to compete with this stuff.
No, and I think the message is that any kind of viable competitor that had been in that place at that time where Twitter had just booted off President Trump and he had been rumored to be coming over to us. We happen to be the one, right? But it could have been somebody else. It just so happened, coincidentally, I don't know if you knew this, but AWS had signed a big contract with Twitter a few weeks before we were kicked off. So this constellation of factors, those somehow wound up in us getting booted with about 48 hours notice.
Wow. Yeah, that we're going to mention that in our newscast in a little bit. This was something that was really recently kind of unearthed. It was reported on, but not widely back when it happened. But you're absolutely right. Twitter signed an agreement towards the end of 2020, and then, ironically or coincidentally or incredible, you guys were ousted a mere handful of weeks later, and you're
actually
probably
10 days.
Biggest competitor.
January
10 days.
10th. January 10th.
Wow. Yeah. And you said how long of a warning did you have when you were ousted, when you were unplugged?
We received the email on the 8th, which was the Friday, and then by midnight on the 10th is when they turned everything off.
We're going to show a segment later where I was discussing this with a bunch of people around the world on a show called World Edition, and they were unaware of it. And one of the people were saying, well, you could just go through the browser. And I said, try right now. So on the air, he tried, and he shows the 404 error on the screen, which I think is just a great thing. The viewers, you guys are going to love it. So you guys really see yourselves as a town square. You're not really taking sides on this thing. You're just giving the platform for people to voice. How many people are on Parler roughly? What size audience is it?
So now it's somewhat diminished because we have been, again, we rebooted, and we've rebooted now a couple times, and we have not yet been going out and doing the big push for trying to bring everybody back. But as far as I know, we had well over 11 million domestic accounts as of the time that we were taken down, and we had some millions of foreign as well, but mostly domestic accounts. And so as we go through the process of letting people know that we're back and that we have improved technology, actually, it turns out it's been a struggle. It's been a long struggle here, a lot of work, but not only, do we have an independent stack, which, that was one of the things that, we were going to talk about, which is, Amazon, and you mentioned it in your little video. That was a great video, by the way. But you talked about the fact that a cloud service like Amazon is more than happy to make you dependent on all of the services that they provide. So when Amazon just, ripped the cloud right out from under us, it was not only that, but there were a series of different services, a bunch of different services that were tied to that. And so we had to rebuild that whole stack. And then in addition, as I said, we've made the extra election to rebuild the whole code base so that we're going to be even more solid going into the future.
Yeah, by the way, we have an interview coming up with Alan Nekhom later in this show. He's a CTO that was getting deeply involved with AWS when you guys got pulled in January, and it caused him and his team to freeze in their tracks. Mm-hmm. They backpedaled a little bit, and then they started looking for, okay, how do we turn the 6 weeks, I guess you guys were down roughly, into 6 seconds? How can we do that? So he actually wrote a white paper documenting as they were going through, saying, here's what every CTO in the world needs to know about that. So folks, stick around for the second half. You're going to love the interview with Alan on that. We've kind of hedged around it. We've talked about it, but just to pull the whole moose out on the table, what happened in the second week of January for the folks that don't know?
So we had gotten an email from Amazon and then both also from Apple on the same day saying, it's come to our attention that there's all of this violent content on your platform, and you need to show us within X time, whether it be 24, 48 hours, that you can handle all of this content appropriately, otherwise we're going to pull you down. And this came out of the blue. In particular with Amazon, it was notable because there had been an email exchange a day or two before it was an exchange that had finished the day before on the Thursday, where the Amazon representative had written back and said, oh, we consider this resolved. And then the next day you get this email saying you're going to be taken down. So there was definitely not good communication within Amazon. The thing that's notable though, right? So there's this content, right? There's this violent and inciting content. Nobody disagrees about the merit of this content. It has no merit. It doesn't have any place in a discussion that is substantive or productive about any issue. That content has always violated Parler's guidelines. It violates, of course, the guidelines of other platforms as well. But what we learned in the weeks after, remember the 6th of January, what we learned in the weeks after was that this content was not only on Parler, it was everywhere. And in particular, there were studies about how much of it was on Facebook, and that there was planning going on in the groups on Facebook. You know, we don't have groups on Parler. Parler was not a great place to plan, you know, to get together with people the way that Facebook was. Parler was unfairly singled out for this. And I think in part because it was reputed to have the conservatives. Of course, there are predominantly a lot of conservative people because they've been kicked off or mistreated on other platforms. But the fact that you have a lot of conservatives on your platform doesn't mean you have a lot of people who planned any sort of violent activities around the 6th. Those people were all over the internet. In fact, Ashley Babbitt, who was the woman who was killed on the Capitol on the 6th of January, she had a Parler account, but she wasn't active on it. In fact, she was active on Twitter up to the last day of her life. So you find that this content was everywhere, and Kill Mike Pence was trending on Twitter the weekend that we were taken down. Parler, the facts show, was unfairly singled out.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, and I'm going to give a shout out to Rex Lee of Cyber Talk. He's an investigative reporter on these types of subjects, and he actually found a CNN report you might be interested in. I think he took a screenshot of it before it was taken down, where they cited that it was only 1 or 2 people on Parler that were saying these things, and they tracked like 219,000 people on Twitter that were saying exactly the same thing. So it was an amazing.
You know, the quantitative studies. The quantitative studies are a little bit tricky, right? Because you talk about Parler is a relatively smaller platform, and then Twitter is a bit bigger, and then Facebook is quite a bit bigger. So the thing that is clear, though, is that this content was everywhere. That Facebook and Twitter, with all the resources that they had at their disposal, still could not control this content around the weeks leading up to the 6th. And the other thing that had come out in the weeks following the 10th of January, when we were deplatformed, was the fact that in the weeks leading up to the 6th, Parler had been working with law enforcement with respect to some of this content. So, you know, you take a public post. These are posts publicly, you know, that could be shared with law enforcement. And at Parler, we had shared some of those with law enforcement in the weeks leading up to the 6th, in fact, cooperating. And so the idea that Parler was somehow responsible for the events of the 6th due to user-generated content on the platform is just ridiculous.
Yeah, and you'll see some attorneys' takes later on in the show. They agree with you. It was absolutely absurd. It was, you know, in my opinion, antitrust. And there's a lot of issues here. Let me ask you one last question, because we only got and I wish I had all night to talk to you about this stuff.
Another time, right?
Yeah, I hope. That would be fantastic. If you had a time machine and you could go back in time to tell yourself, hey, these are the things you need to prepare for in 2021, what would they be?
I would say the biggest thing, if you are trying to do something like what Parler is doing, and again, it doesn't seem like it should be that controversial, that we respect user privacy. This is something that we hadn't talked too much about, but we are very much privacy conscious in setting up every aspect of what we do at Parler. We don't data mine. We treat people as human beings and not as commodities. And then in addition, to encourage them to think for themselves and to be viewpoint neutral. This shouldn't be so controversial, but today it is. And so when you know that it is, what you need to do is have a resilient stack where you have duplicates of everything ready to go in case something like this happens to you. So have redundancies built in. That's the biggest lesson.
Great advice. More on that in the second half of the show with Alan, too. So everybody make sure to stick around. Amy Peikoff, it's been a delight. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for inviting me. Have a good night.
And we'll be right back after this.
Watch out. Data from your car seat ends up at your health insurance. Data from your last meal with your tax assessor. And data from your banker flies to your travel site. At privacy.coop, we call these insights. And businesses are selling them like crazy because you haven't told them to stop. Every cost in your life is now data-driven, and they're skyrocketing because of data inside inflation. You may be overpaying as much as $250 or more per month from inside inflation. If you had a drafty house and high utility bills, wouldn't you invest in storm windows and insulation to cut down monthly expenses? That's exactly what data inside inflation is like. Privacy.coop, a certified nonprofit authorized agent, helps you demand businesses stop exploiting your data. They'll even make them sign terms to license future use, driving down your inside inflation. Our lifetime co-op membership, only $25. Act now to secure your information rights at privacy.coop. Value your rights.
The privacy co-op exists so that we can enable people and work with people to fight data injustice. And there's a lot of it going on this week. It's in the news all over the place. And we do that by parsing out privacy law from publicity law. In the United States in particular, there's been a conflation, maybe an unnecessary conflation between the two over the past 100 years. And as we're parsing these things out, we're finding a phase space of opportunity between them.
You have the right to create your own internet television worldwide show, which we did on IBM TV or whatever other platform you want. So your minority views aren't quashed. They're only quashed because in your brain you're worshiping
Nick,
Facebook. You're worshiping Twitter.
I think
you're worshiping big companies. I don't worship big companies. Tell them to go take a hike.
To put a finer point on what Nick just said, I just have a question for Nick. When you're talking about the difference between apps and the internet, are you saying that people still had access to Parler through the browser? I think that's what you're saying, and they did. They did until 24 hours ago when AWS shut them down on the platform. Now your browser can't get to Parler because Parler, for the time being, does not exist. That's what I'm talking about. If a tree falls in the forest and nobody's around to hear it, does it still make a noise? If a person is complaining and having freedom of speech and exercising, and yet they've been silenced by the large platforms for whatever reason, right? Do they still exist? And I think digitally speaking, they don't. And I think it is tantamount to data genocide.
We saw this in World War II. We saw the socialists. We saw the Nazis. We saw all these different groups that would go around and burn books. More recently, we have seen groups in the Middle East that will blow up, old mosques and old churches and things like that have hundreds of years of history there, and they just destroy them and burn them and bring them to the ground, turn them into ash. We've seen that before, and all we're seeing today is the new digital age doing the same thing, destroying ideas, destroying people. And as I keep saying, for us to actually move forward as humanity, we need to unify and find some commonality, not destroy other people and think that they are our adversities just because they have different opinions. Most of the people that I follow have different opinions to me because I want to know what people that have different opinions to me are thinking at any given time.
Yeah, and this is going back to that parsing privacy from publicity law. What we're talking about is there's a great distinction between the two, and we're talking about publicity law. This is the ability for people to put their data out and to a certain degree monetize their data. When Parler was taken down, they may have affected the handful of people that were putting up violent rhetoric that they should have just taken down off of Parler. But at the same time, they took down mom and pop small businesses that were using Parler as their only method for advertising that they could afford. And they were driving people to their products. Now, when you took it down, you have damaged a very significant component of our economy, and people aren't thinking about that because they're arguing about tolerance versus intolerance. There's no temperance in the middle that are allowing people to reason their way through these decisions. They're just being made within 48 hours without thinking.
Jay, who took it down?
Amazon did.
Amazon
and specifically, I've got the answer for you. It's Amazon AWS. Now, if a platform went up and they were a child pornography ring and they were set up on AWS and AWS took it down, we would all applaud them. And if somebody put up a human trafficking ring on AWS and Amazon took them down, we would all applaud them. The distinction here is not the policy being wrong. The policy was right, but the people that were implementing the policy had an agenda themselves, and that happens in big companies. And if you get a little overzealous and allow yourself to be driven by your own passions, you tell a platform on AWS, you have 48 hours to take out all of these, what we consider otherwise objectionable material, or we're going to shut your platform down. Now, what Amazon AWS could not do is take down the 219,000 exact same posts that were out on Twitter, because Twitter's not in AWS, right? So they weren't thinking about this reasonably or rationally. The people that were implementing what is otherwise a reasonable policy without any temperance, they went to intolerance. And with intolerance, they took down a platform and damaged, I would say 98% of the people that were on Parler are totally innocent, and most of them are small businesses trying to drive market to their products. Parler is a town square. They don't have an agenda. So this is really a shame. It's reprehensible what happened to them. So if you go to a browser, as of yesterday, if you went to a browser after midnight the day before and typed in parler.com, you would get a 404 error.
Website
Amazon's Route 53 wasn't even redirecting the URL at the time. They were just giving you a dead end.
Sue them, baby. I mean, the thing is, see, that's an antitrust violation. I'm sorry.
It is an antitrust violation. You're exactly right.
This is a good example why we need antitrust laws and enforce them, Jay, because the thing is, they do not have the right to control the internet. And I just saw it. You're right. They're taken down.
Yeah, and not only that, but Section 230, the Germans didn't have the right to march Jews into the showers by the millions, right? But they did it. And Section 230 is a lot like those showers. It's a mechanism by which you can deperson people from digital life. And you can do it in mass against a group of people.
Total agreement. That's part of the reason why I'm totally favored of these, what do they call it? We're doing these antitrust suits against the big data companies, because they should not have the right to just strike unilaterally a company off the internet.
In private eye news, we have a little correction to make to the last segment recorded January 12 of this year. I said that Twitter wasn't in AWS. Interestingly enough, it later came to light that Twitter did ink a deal to move into AWS starting in December of 2020. Very interesting that Twitter moved in and their upstart competitor Parler was tossed out around the same time. Makes you ask new questions, doesn't it? Brittany Gibson of Prospect.org reported that Congress fighting big tech is making for strange bedfellows. Her report highlights that major bipartisan legislation has been an endangered species in Congress the past several years, but in an unlikely confluence of events, has created a coalition of lawmakers from far left to far right in favor of regulating big tech monopolies. Now the question is whether they can actually legislate on an issue where they have stumbled into common cause. Her story highlights efforts between Democrats who want to, quote, rally bipartisan support for its expansive set of legislative recommendations, and Republicans angry about big tech's role in the data genocide, who are trying to balance their typically skittish attitude towards antitrust. For example, Representative Ken Buck, a Republican from Colorado, said, I see the need in big tech because of the abuse. I haven't seen that in other areas. This fight will likely come down, as it always does, to two hills people are willing to fight and die on. One is private right of action, where conservatives will fight against what they call, quote, flooding the courts with frivolous lawsuits, end quote. And the other is preemption, where liberals will fight against federal law, superseding more powerful state privacy law, such as California's CCPA. Politics indeed make for strange bedfellows because on both of those accounts, each party has the opposite argument for many other topics. In these hearings, the name Parler has come up again and again. But until now, it looks like it's little more than saber rattling for new political favors. Rebecca Clark, Maggie Miller, and Chris Mills Rodrigo of The Hill, reporting on MSN.com, coined a new phrase, Silicon Valley, as they covered increasing collaboration between the U.S. government and tech giants. The report was critical of the dubious relationship between politicians and FAANG. Nothing new, as this is a growing issue in most all countries around the world. This highlights how mounting pressure from both parties likely drove Parler to make compromises in their own app to get it reintroduced to the Apple platform last month. The report used the term, quote, selling out in their headline for the changes Parler had to make in order to be blessed by Apple. Interestingly enough, our investigators were curious if the reporters of this story or their employers may have had something to gain by Parler receiving a black eye from this story. But it is interesting to note that Twitter, which is also on the Apple App Store, did not have to make changes to their app in order to be listed there, and these reporters failed to mention that. In a related story by the same reporters, civil rights organization Color of Change is urging Google to conduct a racial equity audit, spurred both by the Silicon Valley giant's business model and its treatment of employees. The petition, launched Tuesday, calls for Google to take action in line with the public statements that their company had put forth after the nationwide racial justice protest last year, sparked by the police killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. The group complains that Google talks the talk, but has yet to prove they walk the walk when it comes to, quote, their practices, which have incentivized a lot of harm in our community. Our last story tonight, hey folks, remember to hit subscribe and that bell thing and like and follow and share, and that's how we pay the bills. And don't forget to watch to the end because we have something fun for you. We're sticking around for, I assure you. And that wraps up Private Eye News for this week. We'll be back with our next guest, the great and mighty Alan Nekhom, CTO of Privacy Co-op. All right, we are back, and this is going to be a great segment. We are so fortunate to have in the studio with us Alan Nekhom. I'm going to bring him in right now. Everybody welcome him, Alan Nekhom. Welcome.
Hi, Jay. Thank you for having me on the show tonight.
It's great to have you here. Alan, we do every show, we start an interview off with Bernard Pivou's famous 10 questions. Of course, as we've already stated, we're a nonprofit, so instead of 10 questions, we can only forward 4.5. I'm going to pick up in the second half of the question from the first half of the show, so just you kind of swing with it the best you can. The question is, or rather the half question is, more desire taking dancing lessons with?
I'm going to go with President Obama. I've always wanted to learn how to tango, and I think he would be really great at it.
I bet so. That's a good question, a good answer there. Google or Bing?
Jay, I'm going to have to change your question a little bit and go with DuckDuckGo or SnowCow. SnowCow it is.
SnowCow for the win. All right. If you could change any one thing about your education, what would it be?
You know, I had some really unusual options when I went to college. I opted for electrical engineering, computer architecture, and moved into AI. But I had a shot at going to Juilliard School of Music. And I occasionally wonder what life would be like if I'd chosen to be a professional musician.
Oh, well, there you go. Certainly less employed. I don't know.
My wife said the same thing.
Okay, fourth question. What is your favorite smell?
Mango ice cream.
Mango ice cream. That's a good answer. Okay, that's interesting. And the last question. When you get to heaven, who would you most like to take tea with?
Jay, I'm an avid watcher of your show, and knowing that question was coming, I gave it a lot of thought. And at the risk of losing any aspect of humility, I want to take tea with the most interesting person there. My wife suggested you probably think that's you, don't you? But I'm going to go with, let me switch to beer. I'd like to have a beer with Albert Einstein.
A beer with Albert Einstein. All right. Good answer. Alan Nekhom, your resume reads like a Library of Congress section for technology. Samsung, ARC International, CTO at PRS, Incorporated, consulting at some of the world's largest firms, and now CTO of the Privacy Co-op. So my first question to you is, you know, we've heard an awful lot about cloud in this TV show, in this episode. You know, for the folks at home that are maybe not tech savvy, what does cloud mean anyway?
Cloud is a great idea, Jay. It's the idea of, instead of spending a bunch of money to buy a big room full of computers and air conditioning, I'm going to go to companies that have already made that investment. The Amazons, the Google, Cisco, IBM, Alibaba is real big in the Far East. And I'm going to say, guys, rent me your computer space so I don't have to make the investment. So in a nutshell, it's a way to get a tremendous amount of compute power and the scalability without throwing a lot of investment dollars into it.
Right, right. So if I'm hearing you correctly, it's a bit like I want to start up an airline, right? Well, you need an airport to run an airline. Do you go build your own airport? That would be nuts, right? With the overhead and the tower and the security and all that stuff. It's better to just use somebody else's airport they've already built and you focus on building an airline, right? Is that kind of what we're talking about here?
Yep, exactly right. That's a great description.
So if I'm a flower company, I don't want to worry about servers and firewalls and all that jazz. Let me just focus on the flowers and go into somebody's cloud and rent their servers and security and everything. I get it. Okay, so, you know, other than just saving time and money, though, right? We at the Privacy Co-op went into a cloud. Were there some other reasons other than just saving time and money for us to go into the cloud?
Absolutely, Jay. The Privacy Co-op provides a tremendous number of services for the world in general, free services. We provide a, if you will, a complaint engine that will allow people to file civil complaints about improper police profiling without having to present themselves with any perceived risk of going in person. The data is collected, it's kept confidential, it's provided to the authorities for them to make corrective actions. We work on programs that fight human trafficking. We focus on children's data rights and use these technologies to help prevent human trafficking of children, particularly the young children that are being taken into sex slavery. Pretty gruesome things here that we're fighting. We're working with some of our governmental, at the federal government level, representatives and with the CDC on COVID and pandemic tracing. So all of these services are there, they're provided for free, but we also provide services to our affiliates in the form of a CNS. This is a public commons. It's beginning to take root as DNS did across the entire internet. But this is going to provide the ability for corporate affiliates to be able to get instantaneous affirmative express consent. That means opt-ins, folks. And what that does is it enables them to use the data we want them to use legally and through licensing. And these services have to be worldwide. They have to be scalable. The cloud is the only practical way to do that.
You are so right. And on CNS, what you just spoke about, we have affiliates that have transactional needs for something like that. They need speed and they need geo distribution, which means available in multiple countries, so that they're, a server in Japan is not having to call a server in Bentonville, Arkansas, or vice versa. And we also have affiliates with needs for big data, which is a pretty big engine, and it requires a lot of horsepower. And I think it would bankrupt the privacy co-op if we try to go build, that kind of platform. It makes a lot more sense for us to certainly rent. So, there are a lot of clouds out there. There's a cloud by Amazon we've spoken about. There's one hosted by Microsoft, another one by Cisco, and certainly others. IBM is another one. So how are all of these clouds both the same and how are they different?
So Jay, all of the cloud providers give us the operating systems, the compute hardware, the storage, the connectivity, the things that are obvious. But the way they differ is they provide special services. For the co-op to use, for example, Microsoft Azure, if we're going to store data, we have to have hooks in our code that are specific to Azure and their data storage. Those hooks are going to be different whether you're with Microsoft, Cisco, Google, Amazon, IBM. Bottom line is there's a cost to moving. As the folks from Parler told us earlier, they're impacted and there's a cost. So what we're doing as the co-op is we're trying to essentially bring that cost down and to be ready for the unthinkable should it happen. So think about it this way, Jay. The cloud is the ice cream in that Dairy Queen dip cone. Now at Dairy Queen, it's a vanilla dip cone. At Frosty Queen, it's a chocolate dip cone. We want the chocolate or the vanilla, but we don't want to have custom code everywhere. So what we do is we take that ice cream cone and we dip it into that chocolate, making that nice little crunchy shell. What our tech team at the co-op has done is write in code that little crunchy chocolate shell that separates our core technology from the cloud specific. So for us to move to another cloud, we just write a new crunchy shell. It's very low cost and it makes us extremely portable. It also allows us to maintain a presence with multiple cloud providers ready to go. So should the unthinkable happen, we can flip a switch and cut over to a different cloud provider, or even use multiple providers at one time to provide better services for our worldwide corporate affiliates.
So talk about that crunchy shell just for a moment. We are in Amazon AWS, and they offer some really sweet services, and some of them are free or extremely low cost. Something like SMS messaging, which is texting. You need to send out a security code to somebody. I think everybody's familiar with this idea that today you go log in on a website and they go, okay, well, hold on, before we approve you, we're going to text you a code, and you got to go check your telephone and enter the code here, right? That costs money. And I know from experience setting this up at a big corporation, we used to pay a very large amount of money to get a custom phone number that's one of those 5-digit pins, and we were paying per transaction. Well, some of these cloud providers, they do it in such a massive number that for practically free, they'll offer you the SMS service, but that means you're changing your code to call their specific feature, right?
That's exactly it.
And if you move to a different cloud, they may or may not offer that function. And if they do, I doubt it's going to look exactly the same. So you're going to have some impact. So, we don't exactly have 1,000 developers waiting just to do a lot of changes for us, do we, at the Privacy Co-op?
We actually have a very significant team of volunteers. I don't know if your viewers are aware, but the bulk of the services provided by the co-op were generated by volunteers. I mean, we have software people, artificial intelligence, machine learning experts, but we also have attorneys and legal experts. We have folks that specialize in privacy, in fines, identity, worldwide legal matters. And these folks, the vast majority, are here because they feel that what the co-op does is something that the world needs.
Yeah, we're very fortunate for the passion of the folks that are working with us on our team, and by that we get some of the best experts in the world. So I'm appreciative of their help. Thank you very much for everybody that's watching that helps us out. But as we discussed in the show now, so everybody I think is starting to get this idea that a company would go into a cloud to save some money and some time. Then they plug into these specialized services to, because they're being offered at a discount, and they may have some very large needs to meet, right? So they're plugged into these custom services, and they may be more and more entrenched with that cloud if they trust them and things are going well. But, something happened in January, and we've talked about it on this episode. Amazon kicked Parler out of their cloud. Now, I'm not going to get into the wheres and whys and all that jazz. Just the fact that they got kicked out, how did that impact your thinking in this space?
Jay, this was very, very painful for us. And to be very candid, perhaps not the usual comment you hear on a serious talk show, but I soiled my diabetes. It was frightening. I mean, contemplate, never mind why. Let's not speculate. Let's not put words in anybody's mouth. But let's say somebody trips over our plug. Let's say one of our members gets out on Twitter and posts something heinous and hateful. We run the risk that a cloud provider might decide to deplatform us like they did Parler. The problem is we've described the services we provide. Our members, our affiliates, and the general public are depending on these services to be available 24/7. We strive to get as close to 100% uptime as we can for them, and that required us to take a big step back, rethink, and come up with the concept of the dip cone chocolate shell.
Yeah. And, and we weren't the only ones, right? We talked to some of these other cloud providers through this process, and we were hearing anecdotal stories that we're not the only ones, that their sales sheet is chock full these days with other businesses that are, oh my gosh, what's going to happen if we cross Amazon? Are they going to pull the plug on us too, right? And so there's a lot of this activity going on. But you just didn't do the work. You also documented it. Is that right?
Well, that's correct. I mean, if you look at all the things we do as a co-op, we're about public service, make the world a better place. So we took the learning and the knowledge and we put together a white paper, basically a how-to guide, if you will, how to dump your cloud before your cloud dumps you for dummies.
I love it. I love it. And it's available. We have the link up. People can go to bit.ly/cloudkick and read your paper. It's a great, easy read, about 10 pages, and it goes through all the steps of the considerations you need to have in a multi-cloud solution, potentially, right?
Jay, if our viewers today have some additional questions about that, is there a good email address at the co-op where they could reach out to ask their questions?
Absolutely. I'll give them your personal email address. No, I'm just joking. Info@privacy.coop. That's info@privacy.coop. You can send in a request there, and Alan will get those messages to you, those questions to you. But in the time that we have remaining here, if you could find maybe just one takeaway that you would hope the readers would find within your document, what would that be?
Jay, let me be honest. I mentioned our initial reaction, so my advice would be don't overreact. Don't dump the cloud. Don't go back to 100% on-premise computing. It doesn't make sense. Rather, consider a multi-cloud strategy and remember the dip cone. You can make it very easy. You can make it low cost, and you can diversify your vendor pool and protect your clients and your company.
Excellent advice, and what a great takeaway that would be. Alan, I hope all of the CTOs that are watching this program will go out and find your document, your white paper on this subject, and read it. It's a helpful article. And thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Jay, it was a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Great. Here's the music. My favorite music. It's time for Cowboy Caboose. That's the end. Tonight, I'm going to give you a verbal promo code to use to join the Privacy Co-op. If you use the code PRIVACY when signing up, you can save $5 on a lifetime membership. If you like what you see on this show, please join us as a member. You'll be helping us take on the big tech issues of today and tomorrow. Folks, if you were counting tonight, we asked 9 of our 10 famous questions, which leaves 1 unasked. So let me ask it to you right now, our faithful viewers. Number 10, what'd you think? Let us know at pi@privacy.coop. We look forward to hearing from you. Normally on the show, this is where we would go to answer some questions that came in online. We don't have time tonight. It's a little pressed for time. But what I will say is that next week, we have an amazing show for you guys. Make sure you tune in. We're going to be talking about your children's data, and it's an eye-opener. So make sure you tune in for that. And, you know, at this point, we are not really out of time. We're really more out of budget. But that's, you know, part of being a nonprofit. I was expecting to have some really cool titles, but you know what we're going to do? We're just going to rip off some of your stuff. So enjoy watching the titles, and thank you for watching. See you next week. Later, Data Taters.